Welcome to XRP Pro Ledger, and today we are going deep on a number that most people in this community have seen circulating on social media, but almost nobody has done the actual math on. $12.5 trillion. That is the annual payment volume that now flows through Ripple's Treasury management platform, connected to 13,000 banks around the world. Not 12.5 billion, not 12.5 million. $12.5 trillion every single year. And here is what makes that number even more significant than the headline suggests. Right now, approximately 0% of that $12.5 trillion is settled on the XRP ledger. It is all running on traditional banking rails, the same correspondent banking infrastructure that has been processing cross-border payments since 1973. I want you to stay with me through this entire breakdown, because at the 7-minute mark, I'm going to show you exactly what happens to XRP price and utility when even 1% of that $12.5 trillion annual volume migrates from traditional rails to the XRP ledger, and why the platform that makes that migration possible is already live and in the hands of corporate finance departments right now. But first, let us establish how Ripple got here, because the $12.5 trillion number did not appear overnight. On October 16th of 2025, Ripple acquired GTreasury for $1 billion. GTreasury is not a startup. It is a 40-plus year leader in enterprise treasury management systems, the software that Fortune 500 companies and mid-market corporations use to manage their cash positions, forecast liquidity, handle foreign exchange, and process cross-border payments. When Ripple acquired GTreasury for $1 billion, it was acquiring access to the corporate treasury infrastructure of some of the largest companies in the world. Companies whose treasury departments collectively process $12.5 trillion in annual payment volume through 13,000 banking relationships. The GTreasury acquisition was Ripple's third major acquisition in 2025, following the Hidden Road acquisition for $1.25 billion and the Rail acquisition for $200 million. In a single year, Ripple deployed approximately $2.45 billion, acquiring the institutional infrastructure it needed to embed XRP and RLUSD into the heart of global corporate finance. Now, let us talk about what Ripple Treasury actually is, because most people in the community have seen the $12.5 trillion number without understanding the product that sits behind it. Ripple Treasury is the first treasury management system with native digital asset capabilities built directly into an enterprise-grade platform. Before Ripple Treasury, a corporate CFO who wanted to use XRP for cross-border payments needed a separate crypto custody solution, a separate blockchain interface, a separate reconciliation process, and a compliance framework that sat outside their existing treasury infrastructure. The friction of that integration was one of the primary reasons large corporations had not adopted XRP-based treasury solutions, despite the obvious economic case for eliminating Nostro pre-funding requirements. Ripple Treasury eliminates that friction entirely. The platform launched its initial rollout in January of 2026 and completed a major upgrade on April 1st of 2026, introducing digital asset accounts and a unified treasury interface. Now a corporate CFO can see their traditional bank balances, their XRP holdings, their RLUSD positions, and their tokenized asset exposure, all in a single dashboard, using the same software they have been using for cash management for years. There is no separate crypto wallet. There is no manual reconciliation. There is no compliance framework sitting outside the existing treasury system. XRP and RLUSD are now embedded inside the enterprise treasury infrastructure that processes $12.5 trillion of annual payment volume. Now let us talk about the 1% math, because this is what I promised you at the 7-minute mark. $12.5 trillion in annual payment volume. 1% of $12.5 trillion is $125 billion. $125 billion of annual on-chain transaction volume on the XRP ledger. Let me put that number in context. The XRP ledger currently processes approximately 3 million transactions per day, with daily value transferred regularly reaching multi-billion-dollar levels. The institutional DeFi and tokenization growth on XRPL has pushed total tokenized real-world assets to $3.53 billion. $125 billion of annual on-chain volume from Ripple Treasury alone, representing just 1% migration from the existing $12.5 trillion client base, would dwarf the current XRP ledger transaction volumes by orders of magnitude. And here is the mechanism that connects that volume directly to XRP price. Jack McDonald, Ripple's SVP of stablecoins, has confirmed explicitly that every transaction on the XRP ledger requires XRP for fees and operations. Whether the transaction uses RLUSD, XRP directly, or any other asset on the ledger, XRP is the non-optional infrastructure layer. $125 billion of annual transaction volume on the XRP ledger generates $125 billion worth of annual XRP demand. Not speculative demand, operational demand, non-discretionary, automatic, scaling with every additional percentage point of migration from traditional rails to XRPL. Now let us talk about why the timing of this platform's deployment matters so specifically right now. The Clarity Act advanced from the Senate Banking Committee 15-9 on May 14th. The full Senate needs 60 votes. Senate recess begins August 10th. The effective legislative window closes around mid-July. Every corporate CFO who is evaluating Ripple Treasury right now is evaluating it in the context of the Clarity Act's progress. The compliance asterisk that the Clarity Act permanently removes is the same asterisk that Treasury compliance departments at Fortune 500 companies have been navigating around when evaluating XRP-based payment solutions. The platform is already live. The client base already processes $12.5 trillion annually. The regulatory clarity that unlocks full deployment is moving through the Senate right now. Now, let us connect the Ripple Treasury development to the ETF picture. United States spot XRP ETFs have accumulated approximately $1.41 billion in cumulative inflows, with May being the strongest month of the year at over $118 million in net inflows. 905 million XRP tokens are now locked in ETF custody, representing approximately 0.9% of the entire circulating supply. ETF demand represents institutional capital accessing XRP exposure through regulated investment vehicles. Ripple Treasury demand represents institutional capital accessing XRP utility through enterprise treasury infrastructure. These are two separate institutional demand vectors arriving from different directions into the same supply picture. Exchange reserves have dropped from 3.76 billion XRP to approximately 1.66 billion XRP since October 2025, a 56% decline in liquid supply in under 8 months. Two institutional demand vectors converging on a supply pool that has been compressed by 56%. Now let us talk about the RLUSD dimension. RLUSD is Ripple's USD stablecoin, backed 100% by USD deposits in short-term US treasuries, custodied by BNY Mellon, audited by Deloitte, with circulating supply at a new all-time high of $1.65 billion. Inside Ripple Treasury, RLUSD is the primary digital asset focus for corporate treasury cash management. Every RLUSD transaction that flows through Ripple Treasury on the XRP ledger generates mandatory XRP activity. The $12.5 trillion client base using RLUSD for treasury operations creates compounding non-discretionary XRP demand. RLUSD adoption through Ripple Treasury does not compete with XRP. It multiplies XRP utility. Now, let us talk about the broader acquisition context. Hidden Road, acquired for $1.25 billion, cleared the first CME XRP futures block trade. Rail, acquired for $200 million, provides payment infrastructure connecting traditional finance to blockchain rails. GTreasury, acquired for $1 billion, provides treasury management infrastructure connecting corporate finance to blockchain rails. Together, these three acquisitions give Ripple a complete institutional stack. Prime brokerage for trading institutions, payment rails for financial institutions, and treasury management for corporate clients. The total addressable market across all three is measured in hundreds of trillions of dollars annually. Now, I want to address something directly, because this community deserves a rational voice on what the $12.5 trillion figure actually means and what it does not mean. 0% of the $12.5 trillion volume is settled on XRPL today. The 1% migration calculation is a mathematical illustration of potential demand, not a current reality. David Schwartz has been consistent about this. The bull case for XRP is built on visible adoption data and measurable institutional commitment, not on projections that assume instant mass migration. What the Ripple Treasury platform tells you is structural. The infrastructure for $12.5 trillion of annual payment volume to migrate to XRPL is now live, embedded in the enterprise treasury systems that corporate finance departments already use. Connected to 13,000 banking relationships, the migration has not started at scale. The infrastructure that enables it is already deployed. Now I want to talk about what most people in this community are getting wrong right now. XRP is trading between $1.33 and $1.35. Ripple Treasury is live and connected to 13,000 banks, processing $12.5 trillion annually. 905 million XRP locked in ETF custody. CME launched 24/7 XRP futures yesterday. RLUSD at 1.65 billion all-time high. And the retail market is watching a sideways price chart, wondering when something is going to happen. The infrastructure for $12.5 trillion to flow through XRP is already built. The price chart reflects the world before that infrastructure was deployed. So let us zoom out and see the complete picture assembling right now. Ripple acquired GTreasury for $1 billion October 2025. Ripple Treasury now connected to 13,000 banks. $12.5 trillion annual payment volume. 1% migration equals $125 billion in XRPL transaction volume. Digital asset accounts live April 2026. CFOs managing fiat plus digital in single dashboard. Hidden Road, 1.25 billion, and Rail 200 million, completing the institutional stack. ETF cumulative inflows, 1.41 billion, 905 million XRP locked. May strongest month, 118 million. RLUSD, 1.65 billion ATH. CME 24/7 XRP futures live yesterday. Exchange reserves down 56%. Whale wallet 68.5%. Clarity Act advancing toward August 10th deadline. 0% of 12.5 trillion is on XRPL today. 1% is $125 billion. The platform to make it happen is already live. If this analysis changed how you were thinking about what the Ripple Treasury $12.5 trillion figure actually means for XRP, hit like and subscribe. I drop deep dive breakdowns like this twice a day to keep you ahead of the move.